Imagine finding out that nothing you do matters. Your good grades, your dream job, your relationships, none of it has any real meaning. Sounds scary, doesn't it? But there's this French writer, Albert Camus, who said this could actually be the best news you've ever heard. You know that feeling when you finish something big, maybe graduating or getting that job you wanted, but you still feel empty inside, like something's still missing? We all feel this way sometimes. It's like we're trying to fill up a cup that has no bottom. Camus noticed this too, and he had a pretty wild solution. Let's go back to 1942. Paris is under Nazi control, and Camus is sitting in his small apartment, smoking cigarettes and writing about this huge question. If nothing matters, why should we even bother living? Most people would get super depressed thinking about this, but Camus saw it differently. His life wasn't easy. His dad died in a war when he was a baby. His mom had to clean other people's houses just to put food on the table. Then at 17, he got really sick and couldn't play soccer anymore, the one thing he loved most. Every time something bad happened, he looked for a reason why, but there was never an answer. Life just kept being unfair. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of getting sad about it, Camus had this crazy idea. What if life being meaningless is actually good? Think about it. How many times have you done things just because others expected you to? Maybe you picked a college major because your parents wanted you to, or you're working a job you hate because society says it's successful. But if nothing has any real meaning, then you're free to do whatever you want. It's like when you're playing a game. Knowing it's just for fun makes it more enjoyable than if you're playing because you have to. Camus said life is like pushing a big rock up a hill over and over. Sounds boring, right? But if you accept that it doesn't need to mean anything, you can actually start enjoying the push. Here's a simple way to think about it. Have you ever had more fun practicing a hobby when you stop trying to be the best at it? That's what Camus is talking about. When we stop trying to make everything super meaningful and important, we might actually start enjoying life more. In 1942, Albert Camus was working on his most famous book. The streets of Paris were filled with Nazi soldiers, bombs were dropping, and people were scared. But Camus wasn't just writing about the war. He was writing about something that bothered him even more. Why do we feel so lost when life doesn't make sense? Look around today. People are running to different places trying to find meaning. Some turn to religion, hoping God will give them answers. Others chase money and success, thinking that'll make everything clear. Many dive into politics, believing that'll give them purpose. But Camus saw that none of these things really fixed the problem. People were still unhappy, still searching. Camus knew this feeling personally. Growing up poor in Algeria, that's in North Africa, he watched his mom scrub floors and wash other people's clothes just to feed the family. His dad, killed in World War I when Camus was just a baby. Just when he was getting good at soccer, which he loved more than anything, he got really sick with tuberculosis. His lungs were damaged, and his soccer days were over. You'd think all this would make him bitter, but instead, it made him curious. He started noticing something interesting. The more people tried to find some big meaning in their pain, the more frustrated they got. It's like trying to read a book that's written in a language that doesn't exist. You'll drive yourself crazy looking for something that's not there. But here's where it gets really interesting. While everyone else was freaking out about this, Camus had a light bulb moment. He watched how his mom lived. She didn't spend time asking why life was hard. She just lived it one day at a time. She found small joys, a cup of coffee in the morning, a chat with neighbors, the sun on her face. What if, Camus thought, that's all there is to it? What if we're making things harder by always searching for some bigger meaning? This was huge, especially in 1942. The world was at war, everything was chaos. And here's this guy saying, maybe we should stop trying to make sense of everything. People thought he was crazy, but Camus stuck to his guns. He said that once we accept that life doesn't need to make sense, we might actually start living it better. Think about it like this. Have you ever been so worried about what something means that you couldn't enjoy it? Like overthinking a compliment until it makes you anxious? Camus was saying, we do this with our whole lives, and maybe we should stop. Let's talk about what Camus calls the absurd. Don't worry, it's not as complicated as it sounds. You know that feeling when you're screaming for answers, but the universe just gives you silence? That's the absurd. It's the gap between what we want and what we get. Here's a simple example. You study hard, get perfect grades, land your dream job, and follow all society's rules. According to everything we're taught, you should feel complete and happy, right? But often you still feel empty inside. You did everything right, but the universe doesn't give you the satisfaction you were promised. That's the absurd in action. Camus saw this everywhere. Think about justice. We want bad people to get punished and good people to be rewarded. But look around. Sometimes terrible people live amazing lives while kind people suffer. It's like the universe doesn't care about our idea of fairness at all. Or think about love. We're told there's a perfect person out there for everyone. But relationships are messy. People fall in love with those who don't love them back. Perfect couples break up. Long-lasting marriages end suddenly. None of it follows the rules we think it should. Most people try to escape this in 3 ways. Some pretend everything makes sense and ignore anything that doesn't fit their story. Others make up complicated explanations. Maybe it's karma, or God's plan, or destiny. And some just give up entirely, deciding life isn't worth living if it doesn't make sense. But Camus says there's another way. He uses this funny example. Imagine you're getting coffee, and the person behind the counter suddenly starts dancing like a chicken. You'd be confused, right? You might get angry or try to figure out why they're doing it, but you could also just laugh and enjoy the strange moment. That's what Camus suggests we do with life. Instead of getting frustrated when things don't make sense, we can appreciate how weird and unexpected everything is. It's like watching a movie where nothing follows the normal rules. At first, it's frustrating, but once you stop expecting it to make sense, it becomes interesting and even fun. He's not saying we should stop caring about anything. Instead, he's saying we should stop expecting the universe to care back. Once we accept that life is absurd, we can start focusing on what really matters to us, not what we think should matter. Think of it like this. You're at a party where nobody knows the rules of the game they're playing. You can either get upset about it, or you can jump in and make up your own rules. Camus is suggesting we do the second option, but with our whole lives. So what do people usually do when they realize life doesn't make sense? Camus saw 3 main reactions, and they're the same ones we see today. Let's break them down in a way that hits close to home. First, some people just give up. They figure if nothing matters, why bother? You might know someone like this. Maybe that friend who stopped trying in life because, what's the point? Camus says this is like rage quitting a video game just because it doesn't follow the rules you expected. The second group does something Camus calls philosophical suicide. Fancy term, simple meaning. These are people who run away from the problem by jumping into something else completely. Maybe they become workaholics thinking money will fix everything, or they get super religious, letting others tell them what life means, or they lose themselves in social media, comparing their lives to others. Sound familiar? But there's a third way, Camus' way. He calls it rebellion, but don't think protests and picket signs. Think of it more like a kid who knows they can't win a game but keeps playing anyway, just because they're having fun. Remember that Greek myth about Sisyphus? He's the guy forced to push a huge rock up a hill forever. Every time he gets to the top, the rock rolls back down. Sounds like the worst punishment ever, right? But Camus says something wild. He thinks Sisyphus could be happy. Why? Because once Sisyphus accepts his fate and stops hoping for something different, he becomes free. Let's make this real. Think about your job. Maybe it feels pointless sometimes. You finish tasks just to get more tasks, like pushing that rock up the hill. Most people either quit, first reaction, or tell themselves stories about how important their work is, second reaction. But what if you took Camus' approach? What if you just accepted that work doesn't need some deep meaning? You might actually start enjoying parts of it you never noticed before. Or think about social media. We post pictures hoping for likes, then post more pictures hoping for more likes. It never ends. Just like Sisyphus's rock. But what if, instead of quitting social media or pretending likes give us worth, we just had fun with it? Post what makes you happy, not what you think will get the most attention. This is what Camus means by rebellion. It's not about fighting the meaninglessness of life, it's about dancing with it. Like when you're singing in the shower. You know you're not going to become a famous singer, but that's not why you're doing it. You're doing it because, in that moment, it brings you joy. And that's the secret Camus discovered. When we stop demanding that life makes sense, we can finally start living it. Here's the cool part about nothing mattering. It means everything can matter. Sounds weird, right? Let me explain what Camus meant. When you realize life has no built-in meaning, you get to make your own. It's like being handed a blank canvas instead of a coloring book. In a coloring book, you have to stay within the lines someone else drew. But with a blank canvas, you can create whatever you want. Camus lived this idea himself. Even though he believed life had no meaning, he didn't just sit around doing nothing. Instead, he fought against the Nazis and the French resistance. He wrote books that changed how people think. He fell in love, made friends, and lived fully. Why? Because he chose to make these things matter to him. Think about your own life. Maybe you feel stuck because you're not living up to what others expect. Your parents wanted you to be a doctor, but you love making music. Society says you should be married by 30, but you're happy being single. Traditional success means a big house and fancy car, but you'd rather travel and live simply. Here's where Camus' idea becomes super powerful. If nothing has built-in meaning, then your parents' expectations, society's rules, and traditional success, none of it matters unless you choose to make it matter. You're free to say, this is what matters to me. But, and this is important, Camus wasn't saying we should just do whatever we want without caring about others. Instead, he did something really interesting. He chose to care about others precisely because nothing forced him to. It's like helping someone who dropped their groceries. You don't do it because the universe says you must. You do it because you choose to be that kind of person. This changes everything about how we live. That job you hate, you can quit, or you can stay and find parts of it that you choose to care about. That relationship that ended, instead of trying to find some cosmic reason why, you can just accept that it mattered while it lasted. And now you're free to create new meaning. Camus sums it up perfectly in a simple way. I leave Sisyphus at the foot of the mountain. One always finds one's burden again. But Sisyphus teaches us that we can make our burden light by choosing to carry it with joy. In other words, the rock we're pushing doesn't get any lighter, but we get stronger by choosing to push it anyway. This is real freedom. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom to choose what responsibilities matter to us. It's like being the author of your own story instead of just reading someone else's. Think about that friend who posts perfect Instagram photos, but is miserable in real life. Or that coworker who hates their job but keeps saying everything's great. That's what Camus would call living inauthentically. Pretending life is something it's not. Here's a story Camus tells in his book, The Stranger. There's this guy named Meursault who gets in trouble, not for doing anything particularly bad, but for being honest about not feeling sad when his mother dies. Society freaks out because he won't pretend to feel what he's supposed to feel. Camus uses this story to show how we're all expected to act certain ways, feel certain things, even when we don't. But what happens when we drop the act? Camus tried it himself. When everyone was saying you had to pick sides in politics, he stood up and said both sides were wrong. When people said you need religion or revolution to be happy, he said maybe we just need to accept life as it is. People thought he was crazy, but he was just being real. Let's make this super practical. Ever catch yourself saying, I'm fine when you're not? Or pretending to like something just because everyone else does? That's what we're talking about. We spend so much energy trying to be what others expect that we forget how to be ourselves. Here's what living authentically looks like in real life. If you hate parties, stop pretending you love them. If you actually enjoy reading comic books more than classic literature, own it. If your dream is to open a small coffee shop instead of becoming a CEO, go for it. The key is doing these things not because they're cool or successful, but because they're truly what you want. But, and this is important, being authentic doesn't mean being a jerk. Some people hear be yourself and think it means do whatever you want. That's not it. Camus says being authentic means being honest about both the good and bad in life. It means admitting when things are hard instead of pretending everything's perfect. It means celebrating real joys instead of faking happiness for social media. Think of it like taking off a mask you've been wearing so long you forgot it was there. At first, it feels weird, scary even, but then you realize, this is what breathing freely feels like. This is what it means to really live instead of just existing. Remember, according to Camus, you're not failing at life if you're not always happy. You're not doing it wrong if your path looks different from others. The only real failure is pretending to be something you're not because you think that's what life demands of you. In the end, living authentically means looking life straight in the eye and saying, I see you for what you are, and I'm going to live my way anyway. You know what's funny about Camus? While other philosophers sat in dark rooms writing about how awful life is, he was out there enjoying the beach, swimming, and laughing with friends. This wasn't him being shallow, it was him living exactly what he taught. See, Camus grew up in Algeria, right by the Mediterranean Sea. While everyone else was getting tangled up in heavy thoughts, he noticed something simple. The sun still feels good on your skin, even if life has no meaning. Food still tastes amazing, friends still make you laugh. The sea is still beautiful. This is where Camus' ideas get really practical for our lives today. We're all stressed about finding our purpose, making an impact, leaving a legacy. We scroll through social media, feeling like everyone else has figured it out while we're still lost. But Camus would say we've got it backwards. Instead of always chasing tomorrow's happiness, he'd tell us to notice what's good right now. That morning coffee you love? That's real. The joke that makes you laugh? That's real. The friend who gets your weird sense of humor? That's real too. None of these things need to have some deeper meaning to be worth experiencing. Think about kids playing. They don't care if their game changes the world or makes them famous. They're just fully in that moment having fun. Camus says that's not being childish, that's being wise. It's understanding that joy doesn't need justification. But, and this is the tricky part, Camus isn't saying we should just ignore life's problems. Instead, he suggests something really bold. We can face life's meaninglessness and still choose joy. It's like knowing it's going to rain but dancing in it anyway. Here's how to actually do this. Next time you're doing something you enjoy, stop asking, what's the point? Just notice how it feels. Maybe you're drawing, but you'll never be a famous artist. So what? If you love it, that's enough. Maybe you're terrible at singing, but it makes you happy. Sing anyway. The universe doesn't care, so why should you? Camus wrote, "In the midst of winter I found there was within me an invincible summer." That's what he's really teaching us. Not that life makes sense, but that it doesn't need to. Not that we'll find some grand purpose, but that we can create our own happiness even without one. So here's the deal. Life is absurd, nothing matters. And that's exactly why everything can matter. That's why we can laugh at bad jokes, dance badly, love deeply, and live fully. Not because we have to, but because we choose to. In the end, Camus would say the real winner isn't the person who figured out life's meaning. It's the person who stopped looking for it and started living instead.